All right, we're now broadcasting live from the virtual 21 days of eTourism Summit in 2020, focusing in on ways to win in 2021. And we've really tried to build this out kind of like we build out a marketing plan, starting with the macroeconomic ideas with Sarah Quinlan last Thursday, the amazing research report on Friday, which would really be kind of like a situation analysis of where we are now. The great conversation yesterday on kind of laying out a strategic plan for tourism marketers for 2021, which provided some really exciting insight in terms of how tourism marketers are thinking about not only the end of the last few months of 2020, but really gearing up for 2021. And today we've got an extraordinary panel really talking about kind of the KPIs and how do we measure success moving forward and what is a vastly different landscape for destination marketers. So none of this would be possible if it weren't for all the amazing sponsors that have stepped up in really difficult times. And for that, I really want to thank Entrada Insights, new to the game and also game changing in a lot of ways. And I think we're going to be a huge asset for all of us moving forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to one of the co-founders of Entrada Insights and the moderator of today's panel, Jay Kinghorn. Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's attending today's session. It feels quite strange to not be doing this in person because the eTourism crowd is always so welcoming and warm and collaborative. So we appreciate you joining today, and we look forward to your questions coming through the Q&A. I'll introduce myself quickly and then turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. My name is Jay Kinghorn. I'm co-founder of Entrada Insights. Prior to co-founding the company, I was 6.5 years as Associate Managing Director at the Utah Office of Tourism. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to my other esteemed panelists. I'll start with what is clockwise on my screen, Zeke Coleman. Zeke.
Hey, Jay. I'm the Director of Data Intelligence for Visit Savannah, and that just means I'm the resident nerd and do all the media buying and analysis and such. So it's good to be with these really bright people.
Glad to have you, Zeke. Mitch, how about if you go next?
Thanks, Jay. I'm Mitch Whitten. I'm Executive Vice President for Marketing at Visit Fort Worth, and joined the organization 7 years ago, and before that was marketing a private university, which turns out is a little like tourism because we marketed what it's like to live there and showing people around. So great to be with y'all.
Thank you for joining us. And Leah.
Yes, hi. Leah Chandler. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Discover Puerto Rico. We are the brand new, I think we can still say brand new, just about 2.5-year-old destination marketing organization, the first ever DMO for the island of Puerto Rico that was established actually in 2017 through bipartisan legislation. And then we opened our doors in 2018 in the summer. The first time that Puerto Rico has had, a standalone not-for-profit organization that is outside of the government in Puerto Rico. So big opportunity for our island, and I'm proud to have been there when it started.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this discussion. I can honestly say I'm looking forward to it because it's three of really the brightest people that I know in the industry and most forward-thinking. So obviously this year has been dominated by COVID and other assorted disasters that have befell just about every part of the globe. So in thinking about COVID, one of the things that's come up quite a bit as we've spoken with DMOs around the country is partnerships that they hadn't had prior to COVID, that the changing situation has necessitated them to be agile and adaptive in different ways. An example I'm thinking of, Mitch, is your team working to help to drive visits to the restaurants to encourage takeout and keep the restaurant community whole. I'd be curious to hear from each of you, what are the partnerships that maybe you formed through the course of this that maybe you hadn't had previously, and what are some of the actions that you've taken? And maybe we'll start with you, Mitch, to kick us off.
Thanks, Jay. I would say, first of all, I would preface this by saying that, what works for one community may not work for another. And when we've talked about community-based tourism, it's important to remember that, we're tailoring things to what works for Puerto Rico may be different than what works for Savannah and what works for Fort Worth. So it's great to compare notes with my colleagues. I would say that really two big things in Fort Worth. First of all, there's no question that as our hotels were shuttered, our restaurants were trying to stay alive like many communities with takeout and delivery and such. And we've always had a good relationship with them, but we got more involved with them and realized that at least a third of those jobs have traditionally been supported by tourism. So by producing quick turn videos and frankly, creating a restaurant list like we hadn't had before about who's open, who's offering these things. The second thing I would say is, while we've had very good relationships with City Hall, we had never been involved in public health messaging. We did not take the lead on that, but because we've been close with them and we asked when this hit, how can we help? We got involved and created a public relations campaign to promote mask wearing, healthy, safe practices as really a supplement to the health experts. And we really hadn't been involved in those conversations before. So as much as we knew that would build confidence in getting back to tourism one day, we took that role, which was new for us.
Excellent examples. Leah, how about you?
Sure. A relationship that's been in place since the start of the DMO, but has really grown as a result of the pandemic, is with Invest Puerto Rico. They're actually our sister organization focused on economic development on the island. We've seen, with the emergence of the workcation or the working remotely in a vacation destination, there's really a major opportunity to attract business owners and workers who have this newfound flexibility in their jobs. So we're working together with Invest Puerto Rico to develop a really strong value proposition to make Puerto Rico the destination that people choose. There are no passports required to get to Puerto Rico and no currency exchange, and English is widely spoken. And of course, year-round sunshine and warm temperatures. So we think it's an ideal destination for that. So our relationship with Invest Puerto Rico is definitely growing as a result. And we've also established secondarily a formal agreement with our Chamber of Commerce. So as Mitch mentioned, I think a lot of these relationships already existed, but the circumstances in the past 6 to 8 months has really provided opportunities to grow those relationships. And we obviously have a joint goal with the Chamber of Commerce in supporting our local businesses during this really complicated time. And we wanted to make available these tools that we have always had available to our tourism industry to the broader business community, including tutorials and workshops on how to improve Google My Business listings, how to improve your visual assets for your business, and how to manage businesses during crisis. So that's again, just stronger ties, I think, have been formed with organizations that have always been kind of a part of our mission because of this time.
Those are both really outstanding examples how tourism overlaps with economic development, with community, with public policy and storytelling. I'm curious, it looks like Zeke may be having a little trouble, so we'll come back to him when his connection is secure. But Mitch or Leah, what do you think of these relationships that you've built and these broader coalitions that you've been working on over the past several months? What do you think is going to be most enduring and become part of your strategic plan moving forward?
Well, in Fort Worth, there's no question we want to stay in our lane of tourism, but I think it reveals kind of a secret mission for our organization. And that is, we have a fancy mission statement that talks about visibility and economic impact. But at the end of the day, I think our mission is really to make Fort Worth better. And how can we do that? Now, again, you have to maintain your purpose and stay in your lane, but it's really opened our eyes to we've all talked about destination development a lot in the industry, but I think we really have given, in hindsight, probably given it more lip service than we have action. And we really need to lean in on that and say, and I think to Leah's point, find those commonalities with other organizations. I think in our world, there's a lot of people who love to start new initiatives, new organizations to do new things. And we kind of leave behind the idea of, wait a second, we've got a Chamber of Commerce, we've got a tourism authority. What can we do together? And I'm really interested to hear, would love to talk to Leah more about those conversations because we're having them here. And so I think that we stand to really focus on a few priorities with other local partners that maybe before we were trying to do by ourselves.
That's an excellent point of staying in your lane. Zeke, we wanted to make sure that we got your perspective on what are the coalitions or the partnerships that Savannah has built over the last 6 months, and if you can give us some insight into kind of what you've done, how you've expanded your role or adjusted your role a little bit, and what you think is going to endure after COVID as a distant memory?
Yeah. So I'm probably the least qualified to speak to this because I personally in the office am not as closely involved in those partnerships, all of them, the new ones, but we do have the Savannah Safe initiative, which was in partnership with our city, and there's a website detailing all the things that are going to be done and a list of businesses that are safe to go to. So that's hugely important, obviously, in what we do. And I think it was like the third most visited page of our site, but also referrals out to that site were huge. And so KPIs for that are pretty important to help us understand sentiment and how people are feeling about travel. And then we also worked with our sister DMO, Visit Tybee, and just found that obviously beaches were all the rage over the summer. And it was really interesting, different things that were happening where even for some of our campaigns, the beach creative of Tybee at certain points was outpacing the Savannah creative for Savannah bookings. So in other words, people are seeing beach, come to the beach, come to Tybee, they go to Tybee site and they book Savannah because Tybee's full. And so that was interesting. That adjusted our approach for what kind of messaging we're going to put out there. And then finally, we work with our airport, which this would be the worst year to probably promote air travel. But they trusted us, and we've had a good partnership before this, but they really put a lot of eggs in our basket, I guess you could say. And so apart from the co-op, they put a lot of confidence monetarily in us, and we went on and built a plan, and we've since done 3, I think we're on surge 2 now. So they keep giving us more because they like the results, and Allegiant and others like the results as well.
That's fantastic. In thinking about partnerships, Leah, what would be your guidance and your experience from working with the Invest Puerto Rico and the Chamber of Commerce to balance that, what Mitch said of stay in your lane and play to your strengths, while at the same time building really strong, resilient, long-lasting partnerships?
Well, I think Mitch hit the nail on the head. It is about staying in your lane. We know what we do and what we do well, and we have to figure out how can we amplify that with other organizations. So in the case of Discover Puerto Rico, we have an in-house multimedia team that is, I'm a little biased, but the best in the business. And we create amazing content for our channels. I think, what Zeke mentioned with the airport is a great example. And we've done the same thing where we've always had a relationship with Aerostar, the group that runs our airport, but really getting in to the nitty gritty with them when it comes to figuring out how to communicate to inbound tourists. And on an island, you only have a couple of ways to get here. It's on a plane or it's on a cruise ship. And right now it's only on a plane. And so we've had to work very, very closely with them. We don't want to tell them how to intake passengers when they're coming in and try to figure out that screening mechanism. But what we can do is offer our multimedia services to be able to create content and videos and assets that they're able to use in their social channels. They're able to use actually in the airport. And of course, we're able to use on all of our channels as well. So I think it's about, knowing what you do best and being able to transfer that to partners so that they can, utilize the resources that we have. But I think Mitch said it best, just staying in our lane.
And what's been remarkable in talking about this conversation as well as talking with other DMOs is that DMOs have these strengths that they haven't necessarily played to in the past. Exactly as you outlined, Leah, multimedia, storytelling, positioning, branding, and those are things that can overlap with workforce development, attracting remote workers. And you summarize it really succinctly, Mitch, of saying we make Fort Worth better. So Mitch, how do you think of structuring your team and the partnerships? Because there's a little bit of a tension here that DMOs are expanding their role in really positive, productive ways. At the same time, many DMOs have smaller budgets than they've had before. Some have had to furlough employees or go through layoffs. How do you think through the strategy of prioritizing those things that are going to have the greatest impact, both narrowly focused on tourism as more broadly focused on the community?
We really see it as, in some ways, as a tale of two cities. That we have to. It's almost like we're getting tighter with two different core audiences, because our revenue is aligned, like many DMOs, with revenue from hotel stays. We have to be laser focused and in some ways tighter than ever on the ROI that our hotel funders and hotel partners expect from us. And at the same time, balancing that, we have to be in communication with the community and what do they want to see happen. And so from a tourism standpoint, so in some ways it's not ROI versus return on objective, it's both. And it's almost as though we have to be more sophisticated about having those dual conversations. And because at the end of the day, we're all in PR campaigns to promote our cities. And the campaign is not just external, but the campaign is really convincing and assuring our residents that their objectives to grow and sustain their communities are important to us too. So we can't have it both. We have to have it both ways in the sense of helping the hotels grow and at the same time doing what's best for the community.
Those are that's completely on point. Zika, to piggyback on that, we have the internal and external focus, the return on objective and return on ROI. There's also an added dimension of short-term and the acute pain that the hotels and the businesses are facing. And there's a lot of stakeholders are pressuring their DMO to say, we need people right now. And yet at the same time, there's a balance between public safety and also long-term positioning for coming out of this recovery. As someone that's really deep in the numbers and really sophisticated in the way that you're using targeting and agile in your marketing, how are you thinking about this short-term and long-term focus?
Yeah, at this time, I think our business plan is themed that we're navigating the fog, right? Which is you have to drive somewhat slower in a fog because you can't quite see out into the future, and yet you have to keep making forward progress. So you kind of chug along, and every now and then you see daylight peering through. And I like that, and I think that you can use data to do just that, which is, okay, how do you invite someone to come to your destination, but not tell your stakeholders in your community that you're inviting people that could be bringing cases to your destination? Well, we're inviting people that are searching for travel out into the future. They have arrival dates, 2 months out from when it opens. So that's one good way. There's other ways, just mobile device IDs and things of that nature that you can plug into systems for people who are already traveling, and just be sure to hit those people with messages that both let them know, hey, this is a safe destination, you need to keep us safe, but at the same time, this is a destination that's open and ready for you to enjoy. And I think, like I said earlier, the stakeholders really like that. They've seen the impact on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. In thinking about connecting this discussion that we've had over this first 15 minutes to that replace ROI with ROO. What I'm hearing from the three of you is that there is, in a way, a little bit of a tension between that need to demonstrate responsive use of the dollars that we're entrusted to on the marketing side. Mitch talked about the need to go back to the funding source of hotels that are contributing into his tax base and say, here's explicitly what we're doing for you. And at the same time, there are all these new partnerships that also need success measures to go with it. So Leah, maybe you want to start us off with how is your organization looking at expanding the KPIs that they track, and what's the role of marketing attribution and ROI within that context?
Sure. So I think, when it comes to marketing attribution, for Discover Puerto Rico today, that attribution isn't a critical focus because there's very limited marketing that's happening on our end. In fact, by executive order, Discover Puerto Rico is not allowed right now to be marketing. We're prohibited from marketing for generation of demand currently. So what we're focused on is kind of looking at that future demand and how can we generate interest for people coming a few months from now. So for us, the attribution piece during this time is just not a super high priority, as we're very limited in the messaging that we're putting out. We're still using tools like Arrivalist to measure the dispersion of visitors across the island, but currently the volume is so low, it's not really a key metric. It will become much more important as we officially start paid marketing, which is hopefully going to be in the next week or two, and sort of reignite our visitor profile study and marketing engagement study. For us, while we're still in the midst of the pandemic, it's critical we're not just focused on how many people are coming and how much money they're spending and where they're staying. But for us, it's about the need to attract the right visitor to ensure the health and safety of our island. And we're looking at, how we're going to track that for the future. We're beginning to target audiences who are profiling as responsible travelers. Strong consideration is really being given to specific age ranges, gender, and political affiliation that indexes for higher activities like using PPE, and adding in layers for political leanings to research those people who are more receptive to following protocols that we have put in place. Because for an island, even though we're part of the US, we have a very fragile healthcare structure, infrastructure compared to the States. So when we talk about that balance between health and safety and the economy, I think it's more critical in Puerto Rico than anywhere, because an extreme amount of COVID cases on the island could cause significant damage to the population. So we've got to be extra careful. And so when we talk about who we're asking to come to the island, we've got to make sure that those are people who are willing to follow the rules. So attribution today and how we're getting those people and what message they're most receptive to, we just haven't turned on that faucet yet. But I think those are going to be some of the key factors we look at when we do start marketing again, is are we bringing the right people?
And as a quick follow-up to that, because that's a really exceptional use of targeting tactics for a very important public health need and resident need. How are you measuring the success of individual components of that, of those tactics toward the goal of attracting the right visitors to the island?
So we haven't started that piece yet. We're still in the development of what that, if it's a study or if it's a tracking mechanism, is going to look like, because the marketing hasn't fully been turned on. So we're still kind of figuring out what that attribution is going to look like. I think, there are going to be some really simple ways that we're going to notice right out of the gate. And a lot of that is related to earned media coverage of what's happening on the island. What we saw this summer is a lot of altercations between visitors and our locals, who were, creating a lot of tension because visitors were coming in and not following rules. In Puerto Rico, we were one of the very first destinations to institute a curfew, and we had a mandatory mask requirement in place since March. People were coming in from the States and were feeling like it was similar to what was happening in the States at the time, which it was sort of optional. And our locals let people know that that was not the case. So I think, there's going to be some really simple ways we're going to notice right away if that is starting to have an impact. And then we're figuring out kind of what the technical measurement will be moving forward.
That's an excellent example. Mitch, how about in Fort Worth? How are you thinking of measuring some of these broader initiatives that you're doing, and how they fit into an evolving measurement strategy?
So early in COVID, and really up until about 6 weeks ago, we were focused on awareness. How are our web searches doing? To Leah's point, there's been a real hunger for content. I think many DMOs have seen the ability we may not be receiving visitors as much but there's a lot of interest in content. How is your community responding? What are the stories? And so we were gratified to see searches, gravitate upward, and in some weekends in August start to sort of meet where we were last year. We're in an unusual circumstance in Texas because we've seen a lot of travelers start to move around, really walking that line between responsibility and at the same time, how do we say be healthy, be safe, but at the same time, come stay in our hotels. There are some things open. It's unusual because we're surrounded by 7 million people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area alone. So we really have, frankly, turned on advertising a little bit earlier than we had planned. We were one of the first cities where our museums started to reopen. They're at about 30% of their normal traffic. Our Botanic Garden, no surprise, and Nature Center seeing record attendance and tickets because of outdoor activity, things like that. So we had things moving. We had our arena was started to do not concerts, but did a rodeo, and we had a golf tournament, a PGA tournament. So there were things that could be done with distancing. that people were starting to come in for. And very similar to pre-COVID, we do find that people who are responding to our ads are staying longer than those who don't, although we still get a lot of day trippers. And it's really, frankly, most of our effort has been trying to walk that line, frankly, almost a daily basis of what advertising is on, what's the activity on the ground, and talking to our community partners. I think that's one of the things that is taking a lot of time from the people who are listening to us today and us. I bet we are all spending an extraordinary amount of time listening and talking to partners more than before. And that's pure time. And so as much as we have some ads going out, a diminished but still a good campaign, we're also spending time talking to people. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? And that's that closer engagement. And we all talked about being closer to our partners, is a different time element required of us than we had spent before. So all that time we're not spending going to trade shows or going to visit customers and visit with media is really going into listening to locals.
I want to pull on that partner thread a little bit, Zeke, because you and I had a conversation over the summer where you talked about distributing demand to different neighborhoods in Savannah, that there were those areas that had really strong reputation that tended to be the center of gravity, but yet you were working on building out and distributing visitors regionally throughout the city. Can you tell us a little bit more about those efforts?
Yeah, and I can tell you why it's really hard to do. And it gets back to what, I mean, Leah laid out this excellent plan of how they're going to mitigate risk and protect the island. And the problem that, you asked the question, okay, how are you measuring that? Well, we're working on that. And that's like all of our answers probably, right? We're all working on that. And that's, I think that's kind of the difficulty of all of this, is that as we try to prove our existence, so to speak, try to prove that we're doing what makes sense for our stakeholders and that the money invested is driving revenue, it's severely lacking because of our KPIs. They're old, right? Like booking windows are misleading. Why? Because everybody's waiting until the next news headline before they either book or not. Cancellations and booking, fill rates are misleading because of cancellation policies that are wide open. Revenue is misleading because rates are suppressed. And so because of that, it becomes difficult to really, there is attribution, but you have to prepare your listeners and your stakeholders for that. And so back to your question. With that said, I do think there's some unique ways that we can get around these things by some new metrics and by triangulation, which I'm going to throw you guys a bone. Entrada does very well, basically taking, like something like RevPAR, right? Where you take revenue per available room and you're taking occupancy and revenue and you're triangulating, you're putting all these points together to make a new metric. Well, we can take these newer metrics to determine, okay, how good are you at shifting the share of your market to a neighborhood that's undertouched, right? And you can use things like these, right? These phones, which are on you all the time. They're on your side, they're at your bed, they travel with you, they sleep in your hotel room, they go to the beach. And all of that is tracked in tools like Arrivalist and many others. But you can find a good partner, get the device IDs, upload the ones of those who went to those neighborhoods, and then submit it to something like Facebook or some sort of programmatic partner as an audience, and then lookalike target that very audience and market them with the kind of content that is in that neighborhood, and thereby kind of shift, people around. And then you can measure it by determining, lift over a control group, somebody within that group who didn't see your marketing over against someone who did, and go back to stakeholders and confidently say, we had a 30% lift. This seems like a success. That neighborhood's happy. And we're not, the over tourism is becoming less and less of an issue. We have a plan to solve that sort of thing.
A great example and a great use of the technologies. And I appreciate the shout out. One of the things that I think is kind of a through line in the responses that each of the three of you have made is that marketing attribution in its simplest form is really about quantity over quality. And yet each of you have identified through reasons that are unique to your destination why there's a need for DMOs today to be focusing on the right quality of visitor or the right characteristics of visitor. And quality, in this case, and Leah, yours really exemplified it perfectly. It doesn't always have to mean the highest spending traveler. It can mean a traveler who visits locally owned businesses or travels in a certain way. And so I'm curious, as you think about coming out of this crisis and into a recovery mode, how will your KPIs evolve to encompass a broader, more holistic view where marketing attribution and ROI is one key part of that? And what other pieces are you going to bring into your toolbox to measure your efficacy and targeting, your distribution through different parts of the neighborhood, and to measure the impact that you're having from this time with stakeholder engagement, listening, and partnership?
Well, I mean, I'll start. For us, it's not necessarily about changing KPIs. I think for Discover Puerto Rico, it's really about layering KPIs and adding KPIs to answer new questions, because we're all asking questions that are very different from the questions we were asking a year ago. Puerto Rico is no stranger to crisis, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And the KPIs, the core KPIs that we measure, don't change based on those crises. I mean, in the last year alone, we've had, political protests, last summer in 2019, in the first quarter of 2020, we had earthquakes leading into the pandemic. And of course, hurricanes are a constant threat. And we don't change the KPIs based on those crises. We, in fact, it makes the consistency, I think, of those core KPIs even more critical. So we maintain a baseline. New metrics have certainly become important during kind of this reset that we're all going through right now, but we look at those as supplemental, not as a replacement to those KPIs. So I would say an example for us is airlift and just air service and access to air, and people's willingness to even get on an airplane is something we never really looked at before. Sure, capacity is certainly a KPI for us, and how many seats are available and how many flights a day are coming into the island. Always something the DMO is going to track. But whether or not people are willing to get on a plane was never a question that was asked before. And now we're tracking that statistic through consumer sentiment, on a weekly basis, sometimes even more frequently, because we need that number to start going up. So I think it's looking at the specific crisis that you're in and understanding what the new KPIs are that you need to add on to those base KPIs, at least in our situation.
I think the same thing is true for Fort Worth. Speaking of layering, I think sometimes in the past, we've only focused on the macro, and we need to layer in the micro story. And by that, I mean, we literally, when we surpassed a certain visitor milestone in total visitation, we literally would get applause each time we would say that to an audience of locals. And I think that, to Leah's point, where can we focus? What are the community's goals and what are our goals in terms of building that? So, for example, traditionally, international visitation is only 5% of our visitor base, but 15% of the spend. So we want those international visitors in, but that's going to be a micro story. What are we doing for diverse audiences? What are we doing to build more inclusive audiences? What are we doing to build audiences of younger people who may not be as big a spender? In this regard, I'm really interested in what Cision is rolling out since they acquired TrendKite, and the ability for us to add better understanding, glean more from our PR efforts and earned media. And in terms of understanding how different articles can move opinions about Fort Worth and generate traffic on our website. Those don't always roll up to the big numbers that make the headlines. X number of visitors, big economic impact. But we need to train, I think, our stakeholders on those micro stories, how we're addressing community goals, community needs, by moving the needle with different groups. It reminds me of marketing a university in my past life, where it wasn't just the total number of kids you brought to a college. How many engineers do you want? How many business majors? How many arts majors? And the same really applies in tourism, I think, today.
Zeke, this has been a really great thread. Anything that you would like to add to this one?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant analogy to the university, and it's been really helpful. Mitch mentioned it on the kind of the prep. I thought that was phenomenal. So that's it.
You've mentioned, a couple of you have mentioned stakeholders and conditioning the stakeholders. What advice do you have for anyone who's on this call who's thinking, okay, I've been reporting the number of ad impressions, or I've been reporting the number of hotel bookings or hotel occupancy, and I'm hearing you all speak, and you're making a compelling case for broadening that portfolio of measures to include some of the micro conversions and stories along the way, maybe layering in some new contextual factors. What advice do you have for managing stakeholder expectations and making sure that you are keeping your stakeholders informed of why you might be changing the numbers that you're presenting, how this is more meaningful to them, and what the benefit is in the long term?
I would just say that communication is key, which sounds pretty obvious, but we're really leaning into a environment of over communicating during these times. Our director of research and analytics presents in every single board meeting, in every single industry update. There is a section dedicated to the KPIs that we're measuring right now. We've also made our industry aware of a lot of the free research that has been made available through COVID. A lot of vendors and partners out there are tracking things on a weekly basis, especially around consumer sentiment, and we're passing those things along to our industry. We have a research dashboard email that goes out to our industry and stakeholders every Tuesday, and they've really begun to depend on that research to make decisions for their own businesses. And as far as our dashboard goes, we even went a step further and gave our board direct access to our live dashboard, and then provided them training on how to access and use that tool. We specifically use Domo. Research is a major cornerstone of our DMO, and we've prioritized it with our stakeholders since day one, and have tried to make it very accessible for them. And we don't necessarily want to spoon feed them XYZ KPIs every single time. They're each looking for different KPIs based on what their needs are for their own business. So we like to make all of the data available to them through that live dashboard so that they can pull things as they need it. And it's not, nicely packaged and tied up with a bow every single time we present, the great numbers that we want to share, that they want to get into some, nitty gritty detail on ADR or occupancy or whatever. They're able to get in there in real time, see what the hotels are doing, see what the short-term rentals are doing, see what air capacity looks like. And they're, learning how to use those tools, which is a really exciting thing for us. And it also speaks to transparency, which is also a cornerstone of the DMO.
And do you think that your partners will come out of this with a more sophisticated understanding of your research and measurement programs?
Definitely. No doubt.
And before I jump over to Mitch and Zeke for their responses, I just wanted to make sure that the audience is aware that we're happy to take your questions and address those during the back half of the session. So please drop those into the Q&A panel if you have a question for our participants. Zeke, Mitch, how is this changing for you and the way that you interact with your key stakeholders?
I was going to say, I think one thing that Leah mentioned is super important, which is maintaining a benchmark, right? And so explaining and communicating to your stakeholders the reason we're changing. It isn't so much that we're just going to completely ignore what we've been showing you. We're going to look at that too, to see how that changes over time as well, and how things are impacted, and so that you kind of have a frame of reference for what you used to look at. But what we'd like to do is introduce you to something that may give us a better idea of how we're actually doing. And then I think it's really important, if you're going to change KPIs with stakeholders, to make it clear for them what you can and cannot control. Because if you set yourself up to be judged according to KPIs that have nothing to do with your ability to impact the market, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And it may look good at first when things are good, but when things are bad, they're going to say, hey, why can't you work your magic? And you're going to have to, come from behind the curtain and say, we actually never touched that. That just was market factors. So I think that's important. An example of that is like, there are different tools that measure consumer sentiment and reviews and things like that in the market. And you could want to affect that, but can you really, on a global scene as a DMO, affect what every possible person wants to say about your destination? Maybe not, maybe incrementally so, but maybe not on the whole. And so again, to present certain KPIs that you can't control could be problematic. So be careful of that.
That's a really excellent point, because in a way, a DMO is a bit like a leaderless organization, or an indirect leader of a community, because exactly as you said, you might have an unscrupulous hotelier or a restaurateur who's bringing down the average as a whole, but there's very little that the DMO can do directly to influence that. Mitch, how about your perspective on changing communications with your stakeholders?
Well, I think that for us, there's not a lot to add to what Leah and Zeke said, which is, really the hallmark of where the industry is going. But I would say that we have struggled to ask ourselves, should we be doing more email? Should we be doing more webinar? And I think that's a healthy exercise to figure out what does the community need. In many ways, we found that different parts of our community need different things. So we've been doing every 2 weeks, we do a call with our cultural attractions, to our board, more email oriented. One interesting development, just to add a one spin on it, is again, I've mentioned the restaurants, and because we've been close to them, but getting even closer, one of the things they said to us is, look, especially downtown and in key districts, without business travel, that takes off just a huge layer. I mean, not just conventions, but other business travel. That takes away so much. We need more intelligence about anything coming to town. So we've actually redeployed one of our staff members who is on the convention sales side to temporarily spend more time with the restaurants and to try to ferret out from hotels any clues we have to activity. So we do have some weddings going on. We do have some small single property activity happening. And being able to provide that intelligence to downtown is very manual and time intensive, but it's just one small way we're trying to help out the downtown restaurants and in some of the core districts by trying to give them activity that wouldn't normally show up in a convention report because we have no conventions right now. So that idea of, again, trying to manually pull information just to say, hey, there's here's the occupancy projected this weekend. We got some extra clues to it. And that helps companies who are struggling to guess what staffing, food ordering, things like that they should do. So just to wrap up, and that's just, again, a new element for us in our communication.
We've seen that kind of situation play out in other communities as well, that the community as a whole is down from the prior year, but that the downtown business district is suffering even worse than the community as a whole. And so even within a city or a county, there's kind of a micro set of environments that are at play and understanding what's happening here and there and addressing those needs really specifically. I'm curious, as we think about these expanded portfolio of KPIs, how might a strategy be different at the city level than at a territory or a state level? Does it require a different approach based on the size of the geography or the complexity of the destination?
Well, it probably depends on the size of the city, because even though Puerto Rico is its own territory and has a variety of stakeholders, a destination the size of Mitch's is also going to span, a wide swath of stakeholders. For us, and I think Mitch mentioned this earlier, the different municipalities across Puerto Rico have different needs. There's different levels of sophistication when it comes to tourism businesses in the mountain region versus, if you're in the metro region in San Juan. So we're definitely trying to stay in touch with the municipalities to understand what their needs are. And certainly our strategy from the start of the DMO, more important than ever now, is that dispersion of travelers out to those regions, because they're suffering as much as the metro area is. And we want visitors to understand that there's a lot to do outside of the San Juan metro area. And a lot of our assets, the videos, the content that we're creating is kind of sharing what those experiences are beyond the metro. So I think strategy definitely depends on the type of stakeholders you have in each region, what your product is, of course. And I can see, that, Savannah may be different because it's a little bit smaller, but certainly the different geographies in Puerto Rico are going to play into what our strategy is.
Absolutely. Zeke, any guidance that you have from being in your community?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're sort of a lot of people don't even know that Savannah's in Georgia because we're right next to South Carolina. So it's this weird little spot where it's really difficult to silo your KPIs up based on location, because you may say, okay, in-state travel, when really if we're on the border, it's kind of this weird diagram of both sides. So I think, yeah, it's definitely different. It's definitely, you have to look at little things like that. You have to consider how things are broken up from a data perspective. Atlanta, for instance, is our top feeder market by far. And yet, because of how it's broken up by zip code, it's got so many zip codes, there's actually little destinations within Georgia that beat out Atlanta in some of our reporting software. So we had to go back to them and say, hey, can you aggregate some of these zip codes in order for us to see our actual top market and not these smaller markets? And those are just things you have to do both in targeting and in research that I think are important.
Yeah, I was going to jump in just to say same true for Fort Worth. I'm part of a 7 million person metroplex with Dallas and more than 40 other municipalities. Has its own challenges. In many ways, we think Dallas is our best friend and our worst enemy because they overshadow us in many ways, but they're also a great friend in bringing people to the region and who can get around and see attractions in both cities. So it's got to work for both. And I think it's just a great reminder, as Leah started off saying, is that things are going to be different for different communities. And so we get on these calls and we share our stories. And at the end of the day, it has to work for those listening, it has to work for you. No one size fits all. And some communities can be resort towns can be great draws and they stand alone. We tend to be part of, again, more of a fabric of this area in North Texas, surrounded by so many different cities that we work with collaboratively. So
keeping with you, Mitch, I'd like to have you tease out the phrase that you used earlier of community-based tourism. For people that may not be familiar with that term, what does it mean to you and how is it guiding the strategy in Visit Fort Worth?
So a couple of years ago, when we did a destination master plan, working with Paul Ouimet and that effort really helped us come to grips with the idea that we need to focus on visitors, but what happens here, and many others have too, that what happens here we should be a part of, and we should care about helping guide the destination as it develops. And really, in February this last year, at our annual meeting, shared the idea with our community that it's the local passion that is the magnet for tourism. And so we've all talked about authentic storytelling, but it really is about less about what I come up with and more about bottling up all the good things happening. And I think that's become pretty well accepted in the industry. Really the phrase, at least as I came to know, it came from the CMO of Destination Canada, Gloria Laurie, and I was on a call with her back in April, and she just talked about it's not just about telling the local story, but it's about bottling up the collaboration in your city, how you work together. As Leah talked about, getting more municipalities or more suburbs or more neighborhoods involved. When we get everybody involved, it tells a better story, but it also drives results for more people. So for that, it's kind of an all-in message for us, that it's that tourism, to reinforce that message that beyond offsetting your property taxes, tourism can benefit everybody. We just have to work hard at it. It's not easy, and it takes time to do that.
On a similar theme, Leah or Zeke, what are you doing, or what are your organizations doing, either directly or in partnership with other organizations, to help to support smaller and independent businesses through this time, where they may not be the quintessential tourism business that you think of that would be on the top 15 places to visit on TripAdvisor, but are really part of the character of your community, are suffering from the loss of visitors into your community? What are the steps or the programs that you're putting in place to help support them through this difficult time?
I would say for Puerto Rico, it really started after Hurricane Maria. This effort is kind of started with the Foundation for Puerto Rico, which is a not-for-profit organization that we actually work very closely with. And it's called Bottom Up Recovery. It's going into some of the municipalities of Puerto Rico to really help them understand what they already have there and how that can be turned into tourism product. It's taking, a mountain region that has lots of kiosks where they serve amazing lechon, which is, Caribbean pork, and making a pork highway. I know that Mitch, I think, did this with a ale trail or beer trail in Fort Worth. And so I think some of some of the folks in our industry, there is product kind of right under their noses, but they're not really sure how to turn that into something that is going to be a driver for their municipality or their region. So that's where we can come in and assist with developing assets, taking photos, taking videos, developing videos for them, educating them, I think I mentioned earlier, on how to manage their Google My Business listings, how to use the extranet on discoverpuertorico.com. So for free, they can get on there and upload a few pictures and tell people how to get to, their destination or their business. We're able to provide those tools. In a lot of cases, the product is there. Someone like Foundation for Puerto Rico and Invest Puerto Rico can help develop that product, but then the DMO can come in to really help amplify and sell that product. When we're talking about, bringing in travel advisors, meeting planners, tour operators, they're hungry for product that is new and interesting and authentic, and that is getting people outside of the traditional tourist traps that you see in most destinations, and we have them too. But they're pumped to see something new, and so our job is to help communicate that that availability to these audiences that can bring more visitors there.
As I've heard each of you speak and share your experiences and your stories, I jotted down 4 key themes that I think have emerged through the course of this. 1 is listening, 2, partnerships, 3, communication and helping to support the whole of the community, and then 4th being storytelling. Sort of as we kind of conclude the session over the next 10 minutes, I would love for each of you to offer some concrete words of wisdom from a leading DMO to someone who may be listening saying, well, we're not doing any of those things today. We're kind of stretched as it is. We've got a lot of data that's coming in, it's coming at us. We're trying our best just to manage the KPIs that we have, even if we feel like they're old. What would be the next step that you would encourage everyone in the audience to, if they're going from that state to the goal state and the vision that you all have set forward, what would be the first step that you would encourage each person on this call to consider?
Well, I'm a huge fan of research. That's definitely going to be the first step in everything that we do as a destination. And I would say to someone who's not able to do all of the things we're talking about today or hasn't really started down that road, there are so more than ever I've seen in the destination space, there are so many free resources available. So think about aggregating some of those resources and making them available to your stakeholders, because I think, the more information we can provide them, the smarter business decisions they can make. So I think the research piece is really, really, really important. And communication. I know sometimes, having worked at several DMOs, sometimes it's like, well, do we have anything really important to say? We don't have a campaign running right now, or there's no big activation that we're working on. But businesses today are looking for anything. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for support. They're looking for empathy. And so I think communication, even if you're just sending out, a paragraph through an email blast once a week to say, hey, here's a resource that we saw from Destination Analyst, or, from this research company that's doing a free webinar on Tuesday, log in to check out what consumer sentiment looks like this week. They're hungry for that right now. So I would say research and communication are the 2 key things that I would recommend really leaning into.
Zeke, what's your key next step?
Yeah, I would say, I was going to say something different, and I thought, no, she's right. Research, that's the best one. But seriously, it is. I mean, I was going to say something along the lines of question everything. Basically, don't just assume that you already know who your market is. And I think 2020 has proven that if you take a look at the research, you'll see there's lots of new communities coming to your community, and new people interested in your community that can patron those businesses that you can have access to. And so use the research to build a profile of who your visitor actually is, not the stuff that you built based off of who was downloading visitor guides, not the stuff based off of all the soft metrics. But now, like she said, there's phenomenal opportunities to get really valuable data, and in great volume. And you can break it up by what business people are going to, and you can, and then secondly, I would just say, is hold the hands of your community and your stakeholders. And that's kind of goes back to the previous question, but I mean, we're the best marketers in our community of our destinations. It would be phenomenal if we could just give 1 or 2 key tips or show a small business or a bunch of small businesses, maybe through your local chamber, maybe through something you do, maybe just giving them a call and saying, I can show you how to take your customer list, upload it to Facebook, and create a custom audience that would do way better than anything else you're doing with the TV station. We don't work with the TV station as much for a reason, so you shouldn't. Here, let me help you do that. I think that kind of thing goes a long way and really lays a strong foundation for the future for those businesses to be the best in their industry.
Great points. Mitch, what's your concluding guidance for everyone?
Well, Leah really said it better than I could about communicating information and how helpful that is to people who are hurting. And then Zeke really pointed the way, reminded me of something that Todd Davidson tweeted or said the other day from Travel Oregon. He said, if all we do is bring back travel, is that really the end of our goal? Or is, and so kind of back to the theme of making our communities better. The hard time consuming part it can be bringing more people to the table, going out and finding those businesses, especially when our DMO staffs are reduced. We may not have those positions we had before that are on the front line, just going to meet those businesses and get them involved. So to increase your communication circle, it takes time. It takes time to go give talks to other community organizations, literally walking door to door, reaching out, but making that a priority to bring more people to the table. More people are involved in tourism, more people understand why you're doing it, is also better for your long-term resilience. So really, it's dedicating the time to get to know locals. We had a question in the chat about arrivalists and staycations, and I think we've realized probably more than we used to take for granted that locals are visitors too, and we know they share the story, but they also, when they get outside their own bubbles and visit and spend money, that's important as well. So we haven't really cracked the code on how to account for that. Maybe somebody else has, but that's important as well.
Yeah, it is really important to see the flow of residents, community members, day trippers, overnight visitors to really dive deeply into what you all have said of knowing your visitors, knowing your visitor flow, and also using that information as a way of uplifting all of the businesses and individuals within your community. So with that, I really appreciate all of the time and the expertise that you all have shared. This has been a great discussion. I think what it touches upon is that the DMO has an opportunity to be expanding their role, in some ways elevating their place within the community through these productive partnerships with economic development, with the Restaurant Association, community messaging, and build stronger, more resilient communities coming out of this pandemic, and expanding the way that they're thinking about numbers, gathering research, and sharing that through their community stakeholders. So on that note, I again thank Leah, Zeke, and Mitch for all of your time and expertise and sharing that with the rest of our eTourism audience.
Thanks, Jay.
Guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.